All right, I'm last. I'll go fast. I am here to talk about our work on using collective intelligence to better govern AI. I'm going to start with a set of premises that led me to do this. If you agree with these premises and are doing similar things, I'd love to talk to you about it. If you disagree with them really strongly, I'd also like to hear about it, but I will probably not change my mind. Okay, so fundamentally, I think in a good world, people should have agency and choice over their decisions. I don't think this is always emphasized when we talk about AI governance, but I think it's important. If I didn't think the word democracy isn't currently tied in people's minds to intelligent decisions, I would have said I was working on democracy instead of collective intelligence. But overall, the core reason why I'm doing this is because I think people should have choice over what happens to them. I think this is a core part of any good governance system. 2, I think concentration of power is often not good for this. Happy to talk about exceptions, which exist, and maybe the world will change, but up till now, I think it is the case that concentrating power over time is not good for people having consistent agency over their lives, so it's something that I like to work on. But I think making good decentralized decisions is hard. One of the reasons power concentrates is because incentives go towards power concentration. One of the reasons we're okay with that is because it makes decisions a lot faster and more effective, and they work. At least they happen. And so to solve this problem, we need to be better at making good decentralized decisions, which is currently hard. And I think as transformative tech accelerates, we're likely to have more power concentration in different places, and a bunch of difficult decisions that affect a lot of people. So if you, like me, believe that people should have agency and input over decisions, then you're kind of worried about this, because we're going to have some power concentration, and we're not so good at making decisions. And maybe that works for now. Maybe it won't always work. So I think that we need to have more experiments in figuring this out, and actually using people's input, allowing people to have agency over core decisions, over transformative technology in different ways. Some of these will work, some won't, hence experiments. Started CIP to run a bunch of these kinds of experiments. And I think that this requires experimenting with real people and institutions. So a lot of these things work in theory but not in practice. I would say a bunch of them work in practice but not in theory. And so it is important to try things out with real people and institutions. I'm happy to talk about a bunch of the experiments we've done so far, but I will get to learnings from them pretty quickly. So we've tried a bunch of these in different ways. We have tried getting people's input on what we should evaluate systems for, which we did with OpenAI. We have worked with different entities in Taiwan's digital ministry on information integrity, getting people's input on how elections should be run, how AI should be regulated in the context of elections. We've done stuff with Anthropic on retraining Claude on a constitution written by 1,000 people in the US, randomly selected representative sample. We've worked with Creative Commons and other places like Wikipedia on data governance and getting people's input into data governance. And for a while, set up a bunch of work streams at the UK AI Safety Institute. Just came back to San Francisco from London. Great switch. Which are about how people are likely to react to anthropomorphized models. And we've done some other things. I think I'm not going to go into any of these in particular, but I think some of the things we have learned from these experiments are, when is CI good at making decisions, and when can we make it better? Well, one, I think it works pretty well when we're trying to elicit information from people we don't already have. This is basically why markets work, right? Like, price information lives in a lot of people's heads. It's hard to get it out in some specific way to go to people and ask them what they think things are worth. Instead, we use this decentralized mechanism to do it. So some of our experiments have been like this. I would say the anthropomorphism and the Taiwan experiments are the most like this, and they actually went pretty well. We tried to get information from people on how they were going to react with a certain model. We tested it out. We couldn't have gotten that information otherwise. It was good to inform decisions. The OpenAI experiment, I actually think, did not go well. And it's because we were trying to ask people to weigh in on something they didn't already have thoughts about, and they kind of weren't qualified to have thoughts about. And we are working on finding the right leverage point for that. So I think with tacit information, we need to get better at figuring out where in the life cycle people actually have information that we can get and where they kind of don't. Second, I think this works well when you want people to have normative input into what should happen. We've talked a lot about red lines here. That's the kind of thing I think people should have input on, going back to my first premise. And so some of these things have worked well for that. I think the Anthropic project worked well because a constitution fundamentally is a list of principles. And I think that people should have input into lists of principles. It's fairly legible, and we had great input from it. And the model we trained actually performed just as well, but was like less biased and had other better qualities compared to the original Claude, which is cool. So I think when there are normative preferences involved, you can again be creative about how you get people's information. And we're expanding this now to a more global level. We're working with groups in Tamil Nadu, across Africa, and Brazil to actually get different kinds of input on different kinds of decisions. So talk to me about that if of interest. We're working on building like a constitutional framework that can govern different kinds of entities with more global input. And then the third is, I think this works when you can actually build a system where instead of like tacking your CI onto your AI, you build enough of the model into the collective intelligence process that it just gets better naturally when AI improves. This would be much better than us working on these things separately, right? And honestly, I don't think we have done that much of this yet, but currently in some of the global constitutions work that we're doing, we're trying to build in like, how do we actually make language models a core part of how we're eliciting information from people? And that way, instead of us having to improve it all the time, we can just up-level the model and the process will work better. I am at time. So I think we have tried some of these things. Some have worked, some haven't. Overall, I think we need better ways to do all of them, and they're all a little bit different. And so a bunch of the work CIP is doing next is expanding the kinds of people we're getting normative values from. Like I said, we're working with groups all over the world. Expanding the kinds of ways we can get tacit information from people, which actually does involve using models to elicit like the kinds of things that people wouldn't know enough to naturally tell you. And then trying to get governments to fund like different aspects of this, like we were doing at the Safety Institute. I think we'd like to do more work on incorporating AI directly into this so it scales better. And yeah, we're hiring. Work with us.
Comments?
So I only saw the last 50 seconds, but
That was the better part.
how much do you think the actual digital modality would change the elicitation of whatever preference that you're trying to define? Right now we have LLMs, they're language models, but we also have multimodal models. It seems like there's a lot of behavior in other media contexts that could ostensibly be preference oriented. Do you think that would change the outcomes of the project?
I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, but I'll attempt to answer it anyway, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. Yes, many people do. I think it is the case that we can capture different kinds of preference input now and better absorb it, if that's your question. If it's the other way of like, can a constitution govern a multimodal model? I think we're actually working on some things in that direction, and that part is a little bit more unclear. We also think that people currently express preferences in lots of ways that aren't explicit, right? Like that's one of the reasons the AI scaling thing is helpful. So we're also working on what are the kinds of ways people already express preferences, and instead of directly asking them, can we just shove those into the model instead?
I mention it because a lot of cultures in the third world are not textual cultures. They're like the way that they've accumulated knowledge by oral tradition, they've accumulated knowledge by the passing down of like ritual, and those things do encode value, even though they're not text. So I think it's an important thing to explore through introducing these intelligent.
Yeah, we're actually working on something very early on, like people inputting in particular stories or even pieces of media they feel represent their values, and like trying to use this as an input. So yeah, would love to hear more if you've been thinking about that.